Well, first. Sorry,
That's okay.
You wanted, would you like a TV pulled out
Everyone, are you good with those?
for this stuff?
This fire chair, I'll just have you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a couple.
That's a boom bar. Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. Hey, how you doing? Thanks. It was a big one. One of those big round numbers.
Yeah, I'm gonna give them a
Double
Yeah.
full from our yard.
Tree.
Like,
Yeah.
Well, I'm further along than I'm. Wait a minute.
43. Awesome.
Wait a minute. I gotta
No, we were 82. It's a big deal. Tell my friends, and they're like, really? You're that old? I'm like, thanks. Thanks a lot, dudes. Right? How about that? How about that?
all right, it's 7 p.m. We'll call this meeting to order. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, could we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Pulaski,
Here.
trustee Delapenna,
Here.
trustee Gomke,
I'm here.
trustee Lanisa,
Here.
trustee Pierkowski,
Here.
trustee Trejo.
Here.
Absent is trustee Berkshire. You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Can I have a motion to approve the prepared agenda?
Move, David.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion carries. We'll now move on to village board public comment. Anyone wishing to provide a public comment on an agenda item may address the village board during this time. Madam Clerk, do we have any comments submitted in advance?
No, we do not.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public here tonight that wish to address the board at this time? Let the record show none. We'll move on to officials and staff reports. So under mayor's report, it's my honor to award the inaugural Mayor's Cup from the Rose Parade. So we had 2 categories. One is for business and one is for community organization. So our esteemed panel of judges provided by the Chamber of Commerce voted, and they have selected Stan's Service Center as our business. So if you'd like to come up, we'd like to do the presentation of the cup.
This is how the Stanley Cup started, David.
Don't dent it like they did last night.
Pretty much, we just service the community. Worked there my whole life. Now I own it. Always had fun doing Halloween mobiles. Mike got 1 year left. My kids won't want to do it. They're starting to get older now.
Well, congratulations. We'll have that on display at your shop for a month of your choosing soon. So, congratulations, guys.
Hey, guys.
And then for
Thanks.
the community, we have Roselle Middle School marching band. So representing, we have the principal here today with us. So
Bring her up too.
congratulations to the group.
I'll just say I just finished my first year at RMS. Just having something like this is really cool because the school's just an incredible place with incredible talent. It's nice to be recognized in different places, but to be asked to be part of the different village. Looking forward to more of that.
Thanks.
Well, I'm happy to sponsor it, and hopefully it'll be a new tradition. And now that I put that there, I can't see Brian's face. So,
Behind the scenes anyway.
moving on with my report, tonight we have the presentation of our fiscal year 2021 comprehensive financial report. So I'll invite Jason from Baker Tilly up and Tom for the prelude.
We'll keep the cheer going and the applause. Tonight is the end of one annual cycle, the beginning of another as we end the audit and head into the budget. In your packet tonight and posted to the village's website is the FY 2021 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or the ACFR. The ACFR is the full report of our activities last year, including the auditor's opinion, MD&A, financial statements, notes, supplementary information. Jason Coyle from Baker Tilly is here to discuss the audit process and answer any questions. So with that, I'll bring up Jason. Oh, there he is. And I'll be able to answer any questions.
All right, well, thank you. Good to be with you. Do this on an annual basis, whether it in person or virtual, as we've done in the past. But as Tom mentioned, we wrapped up the audit for your fiscal year ending 21, and the financial reports included in your packet. The name has changed to Annual Comprehensive Annual Financial Report from Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, so one change there. But the most important thing in there, in my opinion, is the opinion from our firm, and that's on the first couple pages. The opinion is several pages long. It does look a little different than it did in the past because of a new audit standard that went into effect that tried to make the opinion a little bit more readable. In that it puts actually the opinion language right at the very top of the opinion, which used to kind of be buried further down. But the meaning of the opinion hasn't changed, even though the language has changed. And what it means is that someone could pick up your financial statements and rely on the information in there in all material respects as they evaluate the financial health and the operations of the village. And so it's an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, if you will, and the highest level of assurance we can give over your financial statements. Right after our opinion is a section called MD&A, which stands for Management's Discussion Analysis. And I probably sound like a broken record because I say this every year, but your financial statements are about 200 pages long. And I know not everyone wants to read 200 pages, but I always encourage elected officials to read at least the Management's Discussion Analysis. It does a nice job of summarizing what went on during the year. There's some summarized charts and graphs and whatnot. So I would encourage you to at least read that information. The meat of the financial statement starts though on page 18 in the paper format, or page 33 in the PDF format, with the statement of net position. And this is where we take all the funds of the village and put them down into a couple different columns. But on this statement is also some information you don't see on a monthly basis, such as your capital assets, your investments in your infrastructure and your buildings and things like that, along with your long-term debt and your long-term net pension liabilities. Are also on this statement, which you don't see on a regular basis. So being in Illinois, I always like to talk about the net pension liabilities. You actually have a net pension asset with one of your pension funds, IMRF, which means they hold more money on your behalf than your liability, at least as of 12/31. We know the stock market's taken a little bit of a turn after that. So, but as of 12/31, you held a net pension asset with them. Collectively, with the three pension funds, IMRF, Police, and Fire, your net pension liabilities went down by about $5 million from last year to this year. So, you're continuing to meet your financial obligations to those pension plans, and you're seeing the appropriate reduction in the overall liability there as well. Then moving on to the funds you're used to seeing on a more regular basis, your governmental funds, your general fund with your corporate fund, primary operating fund, that saw a $315,000 increase in fund balance for the year, largely because you make some transfers out of that funds to other funds. I always like to look at the fund balance to expense ratio in that fund. I know everybody looks at this differently. I look at total expenses to total fund balance, and you're about 60%. So that means theoretically, you could go 60% of the year without collecting money in that fund and still meet your operating costs. Overall, your governmental funds increased $1.6 million for the year. There's some other funds in there called business type or proprietary funds. Those are the ones that are meant to be self-supporting through charges for services, your water, sewer, things like that. We saw increases in those fund balances with the exception of your parking fund, which because of COVID and less people traveling downtown and things like that, we're seeing a decrease of revenue there. But generally speaking, the charges for services are meeting the operations of those funds. That's the basics of your financial statements. There's a lot of detail in your financial statements, including the level of funding of your different pension funds. There's budget to actual reports of all your different funds that are later on in the financial statement. So there's a wealth of information in there. And then at the end of the report, there's 10-year statistical information. We could look back over the last 10 years. How did your fund balances increase or decrease and whatnot? So again, a wealth of information in your financial statements. There is one other document outside of your financial statements that we provide at the end of the audit, and that's our communication report, which there's a lot of information in there. The thing that most people tend to focus on are there any recommendations for improvements in your internal controls? I should say you have a lot of really great internal controls. We don't have a document that says, hey, you're doing all these 100 different things really well. Unfortunately, the standards don't have a way for us to communicate that other than me telling you, you have a lot of great controls right now here. We have over the years been able to reduce our recommendations down to one remaining one which relates to your IT over the financial package and the fact that there's some access by people that we would ideally like to see segregated to different people. We understand practically why it's happening because of how you're set up, but just making you aware that quote unquote risk in your operations continues. Again, doesn't mean you need to change it, but just as a governing body, you should be aware that continues. But again, you're doing a lot of great things, and we've seen those internal control recommendations be reduced over the years because of recommendations being implemented. So, and that kind of summarizes what I was going to talk about, but happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from the board? Wayne?
Just the one about what we could do to with the IT thing. Tom, do we have any plan of like next year having something in place?
Yeah, my response to that recommendation, and I brought it up last year, was to provide a document to IT that they would be able to follow. It's just one of those items that I didn't get to last year, and I'm going to try to do that now. My response is always with this, IT being contracted or, having contracted employees, and we lost somebody for several weeks. It would have been difficult if they were the only people that would be able to onboard somebody into our system. Pardon me. So I see differences, in that. But there are only two people that have the access that is in the recommendation. It's not like we have multiple people doing that. So I will try to work on that.
We do have a plan.
I have a plan. It's just getting there.
Yeah, okay, I get it.
Finishing it.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
Any other questions on the board? All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And Tom will keep you up there for the presentation of our actuarial valuation for the police and pension and fires.
Great. So tonight we also have the actuarial reports in your packet, a little bit shorter than the audit for both the police and fire pension funds. These reports provide the recommended village contributions, which we budget for in 2023, and the calculations, charts, and tables that are required by GASB Statements 67 and 68, and they're reported in the act for which you just saw. So those are several notes, charts, and graphs that are in the audit. Heidi Andorfer from Foster & Foster is here to go over each report and then answer any questions you might
Good evening. Thank you for having us here to present the pension valuation results. We appreciate the time and attention towards the police fire pension funds. So I'm going to turn to page 229 of your packet, which is page 5 of our report. And we're going to start with the police report. It's a little bit bigger than the fire report in terms of asset value. So we'll lead with that one. And there's a few things going on in the fire that we'll address when we get there. But page 5 of our report will show you the bottom line on top here. Specifically looking at the right-hand column will be prior year's numbers and the left-hand column will be this year's numbers as you look at the numbers on the screen there. As you can see, last year at the bottom here, the village recommended contribution was $1.9 million. It's almost $2 million this year. So it's only gone up about 1.6%, which is relatively stable. We do see that increase and we do expect that increase because you do employ a payroll growth assumption, which is an assumption that basically says your amortization on your unfunded liability is going to increase by the payroll growth assumption annually. And that's part of the methodology that's employed in the calculation. So we do expect an increase if all of the actual assumptions come true. There were also some assumption changes that were implemented this year, but you did have some favorable plan experience that did offset some of that. So if we turn to page 6 of our report, the next page, we list those assumptions here for you. And you could see that there were several assumption changes made. These changes were the result of an experience study that was performed. These studies were actually done for both the police fund and the fire fund at a consolidated level. So all Article 3 funds were analyzed together. All Article 4 funds were analyzed together. Foster and Foster actually performed those experience studies for the consolidated police funds. And with those assumption studies came some changes that we've implemented in your plans. We rely a lot of our assumptions are relying on those experience studies because the fund itself is too small to have its own experience to build its own tables. There aren't enough terminations, enough retirements, enough deaths in a given fund to be able to build our own tables to support how the fund will perform. So we actually leverage the experience from all of the Article 3 and all of the Article 4 funds to use in your funds. That being said, you do have custom tables for retirement. We've found that in Roselle, your police and your firemen retire a little bit earlier than what we find on average across all Article 3 and Article 4 funds. So you do have custom tables that are based on your own experience there. And they did come down a little bit from last year, meaning people are retiring a little bit earlier, and that generally will increase liability because it means people have longer to have annuities paid out. We also did reduce the payroll growth assumption. So that assumption that I talked about was 3.5%. That means every year we were expecting your amortization payment to increase by 3.5%. We've reduced that to 3.25%. The impact of that means in the short term, you actually have a bigger amortization payment on your unfunded, but now the trajectory of that payment should be lower. So it will only increase at 3.25% per year. To the extent that we can continue to bring that down, we'd like to do that. Every time we reduce it, it does mean an immediate jump in contributions, but it means longer term, you won't see as steep of a trajectory on that unfunded amortization payment. So it's a healthier thing for the fund if you can lower that. It's painful to lower it quickly though, so we don't generally do that. So that's why only 25 basis points. If we turn to page 8 of our report, page 7 of our report, this is where we get into the details of the numbers here. And there's a lot of numbers on this page and they're very tiny here. So hopefully you have them in front of you on the screen, but focusing on a couple things on this page. First of all, the middle of the page, section B is the assets. You can see that there's 2 asset values listed there, the actuarial value and the market value. And the reason that there's 2 values is that we actually employ actuarial smoothing over a 5-year time period to determine the assets that will be used to calculate the contribution. If we used market value of assets, you'd see a lot more volatility in that year-over-year contribution. As you know, the markets can be quite volatile. So what we do is we smooth the gains and losses out over a 5-year time frame so that you don't see as much volatility in that annual contribution that we're coming to you with. So that's why the difference is there. Right now, actuarial value is lagging market value, which tells me you have deferred gains outstanding. So to the extent that the markets continue downward this year, you'll have some gains to help cushion the blow of that in that actuarial value. So that's the purpose of that methodology. We turn to page 8 of the police report. And again, focusing on that leftmost column here. A couple numbers to point out here. You could see that the fund at this point in time is 63.1% funded. That is an increase from last year's 58.9%. So the fund is certainly moving in the right direction. Now that is based on the market value of assets as of the valuation date. So keep in mind, we take a snapshot of whatever data is in the valuation on January 1st and whatever market value of assets are on January 1st. And those are the numbers that we use to roll into the calculations. So you did see an improvement in your funded status. So you're moving in the right direction. If you look up just a little bit above that 63.1%, you could see that you have $51.8 million of accrued liability. This is the liability that you're targeting. So this is what you want to be fully funded towards. This is basically based on actual accrual service to date. So whatever has been accrued to date is what this number represents. So there will be future accruals for the actives, and that's picked up in the middle of that column, that 716,993. That's the value of your active population of earning 1 year of accrual in your pension fund. So that rolls into the calculation of the annual contribution, which is on page 10 of our report. So if you scroll to page 10 of the police report, section E here at the top, again, focusing on that leftmost column, will show you what that calculation includes. In a perfect world, your contribution is going to include that normal cost plus your administrative expenses. And then remember that the police officers do pay 9.91% of their salary towards this benefit. And so that's offset here in the expected member contribution lines of the 303,759. So in a perfect world, if you were fully funded, that would be your annual contribution you'd be making to the fund. Since you're not fully funded, you're not 100% funded, we do have that number in the middle of the page of about $1.5 million. That's the amortization payment that you're making to pay down that unfunded liability. It's effectively a mortgage on past service that's been earned and not yet paid for. And so that's 74% of the expected village contribution is just sort of playing catch up with that unfunded. You're not unique in any way. And the good news about Roselle is if you look at section F here at the bottom, you could see that you made 109% of the recommended amount last year. So the village actually contributed almost $2.1 million when the recommended amount was 1.9 million. So we're moving in the right direction and doing the right things here. And we'll continue to work towards paying down that unfunded. One other thing I did want to point out about the methodologies, at this point in time, we are amortizing that unfunded over a 19-year period. But last year, the methodology, it was adopted by the boards to change that methodology to ultimately move to a 15-year rolling amortization. This is the same methodology that the IMRF fund is phasing into. Your fund is going to be phasing into that for both the police and fire. So at this point in time, you're at 19 years, that moves to 18 next year. And then in 2027, when you get to 2026, when you get to 15 years, you'll just continue to stick with 15-year amortization every year. So at some point in time, that methodology will start to basically decrease that amortization payment for you so that you're hopefully spreading that out over more generations of taxpayers is really the ultimate goal, but still making payments towards that unfunded and getting that number to come down. Okay, so I'm going to turn you now to page.
Ask you a question.
Absolutely.
What is the normal percentage that villages have funded pension in Illinois? Do you know are we below or are we above?
I would say, given your funded status, you're probably about average. So most funds are probably around that 60% funding level on average. We see some funds that are funded much better, some obviously much worse, and it'll vary based on your funded position. So I'd say you're pretty typical. And you did maintain the 7% interest rate. We do have some funds that have been using a much lower interest rate because pre-consolidation, those funds were very limited in how they could invest. Now with consolidation, all the funds in Illinois can invest in more asset classes and can invest in more equity than they were able to before. So hopefully that interest rate assumption will come up with time. You're already at 7%, so we felt like you're pretty much in the range of where those consolidated funds think they're going to be, at least in the next few years. Hopefully longer term, that return becomes even higher, but we're in a wait and see mode on that. Obviously, the funds just rolled together and the police fund is still collecting assets here as we speak. So, okay, so with that, let's turn to page 276 now of the meeting packet. That will be page 5 of the fire report. And to just quickly walk through the fire numbers. So a lot of what I said about police will apply to fire, but there's a couple of things I did want to point out that are different here. So the biggest difference when you get to page 5 of that report, a couple more pages here. There we go. You could see that last year, the recommended contribution was $713,000. This year, that went up to $951,000. So there was a more significant increase here, about 33%. That happened for a couple of reasons. So remember I mentioned that we do snapshot valuations in these funds. We take whatever data is available on January 1st. Knowing that the fire fund had a budgeted headcount much higher than what was included on that snapshot valuation, a decision was made to make sure that the proper funding was being put into this fund to actually fund to the budgeted headcount and not the 13 actives that were in the plan on January 1st. So we actually valued 17 people and used some basically straw man new hires to fill in the gap for those 4 missing people. So that did increase your normal cost year over year. It's a healthier way to think of things because you really do want to think about funding to your budgeted amount. You don't really want to take that break just because on January 1st, you weren't at full capacity. So that was a good decision to make there, and that did increase the contribution a bit. The other thing that happened was you did have a disability case that back in 2020, we were counting somebody as a disability. Last year, that came back to us as a termination while a lawsuit was being settled. And once that was resolved, that person is now on disability again. So the liability was a little bit volatile in that time period as that person was going back and forth on status, because disability is obviously worth more than termination since they're being paid out currently and have a present annuity being paid out. So that did increase the liability year over year. In a smaller fund like this, you will see volatility when there's actions like that between disabled and retirement and such. So that did cause some more volatility of the numbers as well. Otherwise, the only other thing to point out here, let's turn all the way to page 8 so you can see the funded status here. So you can see last year the fund was 67.2% funded. That actually decreased a little bit down to 65.1% funded. Again, no fault of any actions Roselle was taking. It's just that you did have some volatility in these numbers due to that disabled change. So hopefully next year we see a more stable pattern going forward. And then if we flip to page 10, lastly here, just to walk through that same calculation here again. So in a perfect world, again, you're contributing that normal cost plus administrative expenses less the 9.455% that the firemen contribute out of their own payroll. That's that $154,000 there on an annual basis if you were fully funded. Again, there's that $414,000 number in the middle of that column, which is about 44% of the contribution, actually representing the amount needed to pay off your unfunded. So, the good news is that goes away. Again, that methodology changes where eventually that will become a 15-year rolling methodology here. But at this point, you have 19 years left on that amortization calculation. Again, section F at the bottom, just pointing out, you did contribute 110% of the recommended amount. So again, funding a little bit more than the recommended amount to help pay off that unfunded. So again, Roselle's doing all the right things here. And as an actuary, we like to see that. So that's always good news. So with that, are there any questions about the pension valuations?
Any questions from the board? I think to your point, Wayne, earlier, I think it's hard to make comparisons to other communities. It's apples to oranges in terms of tax base and other things like that. But I think the key takeaway is we're going above and beyond our contributions to the tune of 9 and 10%. And that's great news. And we'll continue to chip away at that. So Lee?
I just have a quick question. It's probably for Tom, but the increase in our fire pension, we did have an offsetting reduction, right, from the contractual services that offset that increase?
Yeah, so as we increase the number of fire, yes, the number of contracted will go down. So on the payroll side, we see that. So yeah, even though we are increasing this, we're saving on that side.
And it was pretty much net neutral, right, if I remember right?
Pardon me?
Like the net was pretty much flat. Like there was.
When
went
we
down.
presented that was mainly payroll, we weren't taking into account pension
Got it.
when it was flat, because we didn't know what the difference would be here. So at some point we'll include these calculations to kind of get where the difference would be.
Okay.
So yeah, we'd have to go back to that, which we were waiting for this to see what the impact would be on our contribution.
Got it.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate the report. The only other thing I have under my report, so the board's aware, we had 3 applicants for the village clerk role. So trustee Della Penna, clerk Burns, and myself will be doing interviews this Friday. And so we hope to be able to provide a recommendation to the board at our July 11th meeting for a person that we'd like to appoint to that vacancy, so that way we can kind of start some overlap onboarding and transitioning as we go through with that, as well as any other recommendations that may come out of that search process. So other than that, that's all that I have under my report. Any trustees have a report tonight? All right, seeing none. Village clerk, any report?
No report.
Village attorney, any report? Village administrator, any report?
No report.
All right, Tom,
Back.
back. It's the trilogy of treasurers reports tonight.
Oh, my gosh.
So I'm going to take a long time on this one.
That wasn't an open invitation.
That's right.
Only if you have good news.
Well, I do have a little bit of good news. Actually, a lot of good news, but this is the May Treasurer's Report, sorry. The slide that we have up on the screen shows some of the major revenues, and it's the monthly budget versus actual for those. As you can see, every single one of them, that far right column, is in the positive territory, with the exception of ambulance billing. And that is actually closing the gap between what we budgeted and what we've been receiving. If you remember, we increased that. There was a lag in time, and now that's starting to catch up. So we're starting to see that gap close. And I would imagine in the next couple months, you'll see that we're actually over budget, or right in line with that, and no longer a negative. So Brian, if you switch to the next slide. So the good news is one of the revenue of the month. So is income tax, and it's 90% higher than 2021. And we received $726,000 in income tax. That's the highest ever received in the village. And I forgot to look back. I wanted to see where I've come from at other places to see if that's the highest I've ever gotten. But and per the Illinois Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, that's the COGFA, it's a bipartisan Illinois group that presents reports every month. The significant growth in withholding taxes, coupled with the expected boost in capital gains related tax revenue, has likely led to the increased levels of the final payment. So basically, payroll taxes coming in. Obviously, people were filing their income taxes for last year, and then capital gains were just huge last year. So that led to this $726,000, really double what we would have expected. And then the strong economic performance with the aid of federal stimulus dollars also leads to a robust level of corporate profits. So the money pumped into the economy is now coming back in different ways to the village. In your report tonight, I have that fire department overtime chart, just as a reminder. That's a new chart. And then the commuter law daily fees continuing to climb. However, we're at about 76,000 revenues under expenditures for that fund. And we'll discuss that more during the mid-year budget. And that number's through 5/31. We are seeing more daily parkers there. And this month, a lot more permits are being purchased. So there's a lot more activity. And I think Metro changing their rate schedule, or their rates, is going to help a lot too. But of course, we have to wait till people go back to working in offices. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board? Yeah, trustee Domke.
It's always a yearly bugaboo about the vehicle stickers. Why are there less people buying vehicle
I
stickers?
wish I knew the answer to that. Don't know. I mean, obviously during the pandemic, I think people took a look and said, you know what, that's one thing I'm going to forego. And we haven't seen it come back. So yeah, we'll try to ask questions, but I don't know. It's just an odd thing. It's been going down every year.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
We'll now move on to unfinished business. Tonight, we have the consent agenda first. All items listed on the consent agenda are considered to be routine, procedural, informational, self-explanatory, or non-controversial in nature and will be enacted in one motion. There'll be no discussion of these items. Tonight, we have presentation approval of the village board minutes from June 16th, 2022. Approve and release the executive session minutes of May 10th, 1986, June 8th, 2009, July 25th, and November 14th, 2011, January 14th, March 11th, March 25th, April 22nd, June 10th, July 8th, September 9th, September 23rd, October 14th, November 4th, December 9th, December 16th, December 17th, 2013, July 14th, 2014, September 12th, 2016, that were previously approved but not released. And these have been reviewed and recommended by release by the administrator and village attorney. Adopt a resolution approving an assessment plat for 333 East Irving Park, pass an ordinance amending ordinances as listed and published in the agenda. Pass an ordinance approving and authorizing the execution of a short-term lease agreement for the property commonly referred to as 333 East Irving Park. Adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement for engineering services for the IEPA wastewater project planning submittal between the village of Roselle in the amount of $25,300.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Madam Clerk, could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Trejo,
Aye.
trustee Domke.
Aye.
Trustee Delapenna,
Aye.
trustee Lanisa,
Aye.
Yurkowski.
Aye. Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think that's it. Sorry, that's on me.
Sorry.
That motion carries. All right, so community development, we don't have anything under that. Administration, we have nothing. Fire, trustee Lanisa.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute a contract between the Village of Roselle and Four Seasons Garage Doors for the purchase and installation of garage door openers at the fire department in the amount of $84,750.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Lanisa. Aye. Trustee Trejo.
Aye.
Trustee Delapenna.
Aye.
Trustee Domke.
Aye.
Yurkowski.
Aye. That motion carries. And then do we want to do the other item, trustee Lanisa?
I'd also like to adopt a resolution authorizing a side letter agreement between the Village of Roselle and the Roselle Professional Firefighters Association, IAFF Logo 4051.
Second.
Any discussion? Could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Lanisa. Aye. Trustee Trejo.
Aye.
Trustee Delapenna.
Aye.
Trustee Domke.
Aye.
Yurkowski.
Aye. All right, and that motion carries. We have nothing tonight under police for trustee Trejo. For public works, in the absence of trustee Berkshire, trustee Trejo, would you mind?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the approval of payment to Hartford Exteriors for the roof replacement at the Boderman wastewater treatment plant, press building and water west pressure adjusting station in the amount of $29,080.00.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Trejo.
Aye.
Trustee Domke.
Aye.
Trustee Delapenna.
Aye.
Trustee Lanisa. Aye. Trustee Yurkowski.
Aye. That motion carries.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to approve and execute change order number 1 for the 2022 sanitary sewer lining project between Village of Roselle and Horror Construction for additional work in the amount of $10,787.90.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Seeing none, that motion carries.
That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We'll move to finance. Trustee Pierkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move approval of the accounts payable list for June 27th, 2022 in the amount of $1,304,441.19.
Second.
Any discussion? We have a roll call, please.
Trustee Yurkowski.
Aye.
Trustee Trejo.
Aye.
Trustee Delapenna.
Aye.
Trustee Domke.
Aye.
Trustee Lanisa. Aye.
All right, and that motion carries. We have no executive session tonight, so we'll move on to new business. We do have a second opportunity for the public to participate in or comment to the village board. Madam Clerk, I'll ask again, do we have any submitted in advance?
We do not.
All right, is there any member of the public here tonight that wishes to make a comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to our first item, the Irving Gas Mart special use. Karen? Bricks. With two Karens, I'm trying to.
So I am seeking some direction and feedback regarding the proposed draft conditions for approval of a special use for an automobile service station at 38 East Irving Park Road. The board has previously directed staff to sort of adopt a ordinance approving the special use with some conditions to make sure that the property owner does some improvements to the property to help further the goals of the TIF plan and sort of just make the property look nicer. So I've listed out all the staff proposed conditions in bullet points in my memo. Staff and the village attorney have been going back and forth with the petitioner's attorney about the specific language of the conditions. So in the packet tonight are included some specific word changes requested by the petitioner's attorney that myself and the village attorney wanted to bring up to the board to get sort of a consensus on how to move forward. The main, I wouldn't say concern, but I would say the main difference is the village was recommending complete reconstruction of the parking lot because it's very cracked and hasn't been maintained. And my and the village attorney's interpretation of the changes kind of implies that maybe they're going to be doing patchwork repairs and replacement to the concrete instead of a complete reconstruction. So essentially, I just wanted to get some feedback on what the board would prefer staff to move forward with. And I included pictures in case anyone hasn't driven by in a while.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board on this? Trustee Domke?
You know, it's
I heard this side.
mulling over my mind here. So the owner has looked at this, their lawyer has looked at this, and the wording that you put in here is such that they are in agreement of this wording?
Yeah, so anything in red in the ordinance is what their attorney proposed as changes.
Red? You just said
Yes.
red?
Mhm.
Okay, well, we read
So
green
some-
colorblind, so.
Anything that's underlined
Yeah, it's
or
underlined.
striped?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So some of the changes are just minor word changes that I think are appropriate.
Okay.
But it's mainly to like number 4, reconstruction of the interior parking lot to eliminate deteriorated and unlevel concrete, deteriorated and unlevel portions, just referencing grandfathered codes. So it's mostly our interpretation of what they're requesting is sort of a patchwork repair instead of a complete reconstruction.
And part of the concerns we had before was with the general look of it, and the actual mini mart part of it looks a lot better than people anticipated. But if we patchwork everything, I think that's going to go back against what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, and I think too, they recently went out there and cut some of the weeds that have been growing up and all the cracks too. So that does make it look a little bit better than maybe like 3 months ago. But it's just a slight difference in request between us and the petitioner.
So Trustee Delaplana, would your preference be to try to push back specifically on the parking or the surface language that's been proposed?
I would love to see the complete reconstruction. I just don't know if for them, if that's fiscally feasible or not. I mean, what was your gut feel when you talked to them? You think it's a deal breaker, or do you think it's something that's still out there?
I mean, judging from the changes, I don't want to say the word deal breaker, but they're definitely pushing back. I don't think they want to make that investment, especially before being able to open operations.
Given the use of this, would the complete reconstruction of the surface trigger any additional remediation potentially for them? And that's what they're trying to avoid in this situation if we had to hypothesize?
It's possible, but that would be up to the IEPA and the fire marshal's office.
Okay.
I mean, personally, I think if you patchwork the actual surface where the gas tanks are and all that, it wouldn't look as bad as a patchwork curb right off Irving Park. That's gonna be the first thing you see when everybody drives past it. You only see the road and by the gas pumps is if you go there to get gas.
Trustee Pierakowski, trustee Lanisa, any thoughts on the language specific to the surface? Trustee Dumpke.
So we're talking like what Tom was talking about, should we push for a more stringent request and then negotiate with them down from that?
I think this is them negotiating down. So it's whether or not the board wants to stand on complete reconstruction or accept sort of their requests.
Trustee Pierakowski.
Also, just assuming from like an optics or not an optics, a visual standpoint or aesthetic standpoint, even if they do a patchwork, I'm sure they're gonna then like reseal it. Like, I think they're just fighting against having to like rip up all of the asphalt and concrete, right? Like the patchwork with like a nice coat of resealing on it and repainting will probably end up.
All concrete.
Mostly concrete.
Yeah, it's all concrete.
Oh, that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying though. It's like we had them then reseal it, things like that. Even just repainting, I think it could end up looking nice.
Trustee Trejo.
I mean, at this point, I think it's reasonable to go with what they're asking for. We still have the language in there that says in accordance with the building development and maintenance standards set forth in the code of ordinances in the village of Roselle. So I mean, like, whatever they do, the patchwork still has to meet our code. So to me, I think it's an overreach on our part to request a full reconstruction of the lot when we still have the language in there saying that it needs to be within the code of ordinances in the village of Roselle. So I'm okay with it as is.
So I've got 2 in favor of as is, 2 kind of wishing to push harder. So Cheryl, I hate to put it on you. Any strong opinion one way or another?
I don't like the looks of the concrete. I just don't. I think it, it looks pretty much broken up, and I would go for the complete removal on it only because I think we're trying to get the aesthetics of that to improve that whole location there. And I'm thinking, looking at these photos, there's nothing pleasant looking at this.
Yep.
I mean, obviously it'd be great to get the full removal, but I feel like they're already saying no, that they don't want to do it. So, I mean, like Karen's saying, like, this is basically what their pushback is that they don't want to do the full lot. So the thing I'm concerned with is potential litigation over something that they could do a patchwork job on their own lot and it's their property. So I would think that they would make their property look as good as possible. So that's the thing I'm really trying to avoid, is getting into a lengthy lawsuit over a patch piece of concrete versus full reconstruction of the lot.
Do we have any appreciation for what their proposed patching would be on what portion of the lot? Because I think that would be relevant to the group. I mean, the fact that it's constructed with concrete, you're not going to have a seamless surface. So I think in many ways, it's going to look similar to how it is today. Just a matter of some of the cracks probably not existing or not. So I think having a better idea of what the restoration plans look like might help. It sounds like the board come to an agreement on it. Do we have any pulse on that from their perspective?
No, I asked the petitioner's attorney to attend tonight. I sent them the agenda. They haven't provided any cost estimates or anything like that.
So yes,
No, I agree with that. I mean, I think it'd be good to get a sense of like, hey, what's the square footage of concrete that's there and what under there, like they have to know how much they want to patch to say like, okay, what percentage of it is going to be replaced versus remain the same.
So I think summarizing where we're at right now, just to get a pulse here, I think everything that's been proposed minus the surface is acceptable by the board. Is that fair to say right now? I think what we need more information from the petitioner is just what does their proposed patching look like? And then from there, I think maybe let's not let's be open to maybe compromising here, but let's put the onus on the petitioner to show us their plan on what the surface patching would look like. So that way, maybe we don't get the whole thing, but maybe we can kind of move the needle on how much patching they're doing. That would be based on the conversation we're having tonight, would be the direction I would.
I think this is the worst it's gonna look, if they even remove most of those weeds. I'm seriously, if you remove those weeds and,
Power wash.
oh, but I mean, if you remove the weeds from the cracks and you put some of that sealer in, like you do on a sidewalk in the cracks, it would look better just by doing that.
Everyone good with that as direction?
Yes.
So,
Well, we don't want to end up in court.
But we also want to do the right thing. for
We
the
do.
community.
Yes, we do. That's the dilemma.
perfect. Thank you so much. Any clarification you'd be on that? All right. Thank you, Karen. We really appreciate it. Next, we have our electricity and natural gas supply contract. Matt?
Good evening. Tonight, I am seeking direction to authorize the village administrator to obtain bids and approve contracts for natural gas and electric supply for streetlights and various village facilities for the lowest provider, subject to the village attorney's review. If you're not aware, the energy market is quite volatile at this moment, and this has caused energy prices to increase. For our future contract, I've been working with Satori Energy, our energy consultant. They estimate that for the new electric contract, that'll be an increase of about $100,000 annually. It's not all bad news, though. Due to the energy prices increasing, previous assistance provided to nuclear plants has been rediverted back to the consumer. So there's a credit that we will be receiving back until May of 2023 that should net the village a positive $140,000. So that'll be a good offset for that first year of the contract. That credit is due to expire in May of 23. However, if energy costs stay elevated, that credit could continue. Additionally, the village has not entered into a competitive contract for natural gas. It had not been advantageous to do so in the past. However, with the current energy market the way it is, the village could save by changing to competitive market for the natural gas contract. This would not affect the annual lump sum payment received by Nicor Gas currently. Satori Energy estimates that we could save about $30,000 annually by competitive contract for natural gas. So I'm here recommending to allow the village administrator authority to work with Satori Energy to execute a 36-month contract for both electric and natural gas at a price not to exceed what's listed in the memo.
Any questions from the board? Yes, trustee Domke.
You're right about the volatility of the market. So if you're going to get a fixed price for 3 years, assuming that some things change and the energy costs go down, is 3 years too long? That what I would ask the board, is 3 years too long to lock in the rates?
I guess I'll ask the one question before we open up to the board. Do we have the option on the terms of that contract?
Yeah, we can go with a lower contract. If you look at the attachments in the pamphlet, you'll notice that the shorter contracts do come with a higher cost. So it's a gamble. If you go with a shorter contract, you pay more during that contract. And with the volatile market, it's hard to say.
But you're assuming the volatile markets are high and they're going to go higher.
Correct.
They're already pretty high.
Hmm?
So in fact, we're historically high.
So I'll turn that back to the board then. So what's the pulse on the 3 years versus as we have it outlined?
I'm fine with 3 years.
All right, Lee, I'm gonna go around the horn.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
I would do 3 years.
3.
3 years sounds good.
All right.
And I would note that these energy prices that are currently presented are not the highest that the village has ever paid.
So beyond the 3-year part, everyone good with moving forward with it as proposed, or any other questions?
I'm fine with it.
All right, you've got consensus.
Much.
Thank you. That ends our new business. Is there any other business for discussion from the board tonight? If not, can I have a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.